They called it the Gilded Tragedy of Blackwood Isle. In the high circles of society, the story was told in hushed tones over amber glasses of scotch. They spoke of the fire that gutted the east wing of the manor, the tragic loss of the young, brilliant heiress, Vivienne, and the heartbreakingly brief mourning period of her betrothed, Julian. But mostly, they spoke of Clara, Vivienne's quiet, overlooked younger sister, who had stepped bravely from the shadows of grief to comfort the shattered fiancé. When Clara married Julian, exactly 90 days after the fire, the gossips called it healing. I called it a transaction. I remember the heat, not the warmth of a hearth on a winter night, but a roaring, hungry beast that tasted of cedar and melted velvet. I remember the smell of Julian's expensive cologne mixed with the acrid stench of smoke as he stood by the balcony railing. I had reached for his hand, coughing, blinded by the black clouds billowing from the hallway. "Julian, please," I had gasped. He didn't take my hand. He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the amber glow of the inferno, and I saw something in them that I had never seen before. Calculation. He looked at the diamond on my finger, then looked at Clara standing in the doorway, clutching a wet cloth to her face. She didn't scream. She didn't call for the servants. She simply walked over, her eyes locked onto mine, and placed her hands on my shoulders. I thought she was going to pull me to safety. Instead, she leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. "You always did take up too much space, Vivienne," she whispered. Then, she pushed. The fall was a blur of tearing fabric and smashing glass. I plummeted from the second-story balcony into the rose bushes below. The thorns tore my flesh, but they also broke my fall. Above me, the east wing collapsed in a spectacular plume of sparks. They never found a body, because I didn't stay to be found. I dragged my broken, burning frame through the mud of the salt marsh, fueled by a pure, icy adrenaline. While they were weeping crocodile tears for the cameras the next morning, I was in the back of a fishmonger's cart, slipping away to the mainland with nothing but a melted gold locket fused to my chest and a hatred that would keep me warm for the next 10 years. For a decade, I was a ghost. I lived in the gray spaces of the world. I worked under assumed names in coastal towns, scrubbed floors, and learned the art of silence. I saved every penny, but more importantly, I watched. Through society papers and financial journals, I watched Clara and Julian. They took my inheritance and built a life of staggering opulence. Julian entered politics, using my family's old money to buy influence. Clara became the darling of the charity galas, wearing silk to cover the fact that her soul was made of ash. But greed is a funny thing. It is never satisfied. By the 9th year, I saw the cracks in their golden empire. Julian's campaigns were bleeding money. He was taking bad loans from dangerous people. Blackwood Manor, rebuilt from the ashes to be even grander than before, was leveraged to the hilt. They were desperate, and desperation makes people blind. I spent the 10th year moving my pawns. I had acquired a massive fortune of my own through, let's call it, aggressive investment in the shipping lanes. I created a persona, Madame Genevieve Dumont, a reclusive, fabulously wealthy widow from the South who was looking to invest in political futures. I sent an agent to Julian with an offer he couldn't refuse: unlimited campaign funding and a bailout for the manor's mortgages. The only catch? Madame Dumont was eccentric. Due to a tragic carriage accident that left her sensitive to light and scarred, she would only meet in darkened rooms. She required absolute privacy. Julian jumped at the lifeline like a drowning man. The night I returned to Blackwood Isle, the fog was so thick you could chew it. I sat in the back of a black town car, wearing a heavy lace veil that obscured everything but the outline of my jaw. Beneath the silk of my dress, the map of scars Clara had given me burned with a phantom itch. As we pulled up the gravel driveway of the rebuilt manor, I looked at the towering stone facade. It was beautiful, it was expensive, and it was mine. The iron gates of Blackwood Manor groaned as they swung open, a sound that felt like a welcoming snarl. Julian was waiting on the marble steps, his hair silvered at the temples, his posture that of a man who had spent a decade practicing the art of the grieving hero. Beside him stood Clara, draped in emerald silk that cost more than the average worker made in a year. As I stepped from the car, leaning slightly on a silver-headed cane for effect, I felt the weight of their gaze. My face was a mystery behind 3 layers of black chantilly lace. "Madame Dumont," Julian said, his voice smooth as aged bourbon. "Welcome to Blackwood. We are honored by your interest in our future." "The honor is mine, Senator," I whispered. I had practiced this voice for years, a raspy, melodic husk that sounded like it had been scorched by smoke. "Your reputation for resilience precedes you." Clara's eyes flickered. She was always the more intuitive of the two. "You find resilience an admirable trait, madame?" "In this world, Clara," I said, using her name with a casualness that made her stiffen. "It is the only trait that ensures survival." Over the next month, I became the ghost haunting their hallways. I moved into the renovated East Wing, the very wing that had once been my tomb. I kept the curtains drawn and the lamps dimmed. I fed Julian's ambition with wire transfers of staggering sums, watching him bloat with a false sense of security. I watched them from the shadows. I saw the way Julian snapped at the servants when the cameras weren't rolling. I saw the way Clara drank gin in the library at 3 a.m., staring at the spot on the balcony where I had once stood. They weren't happy. They were merely high-functioning addicts of power. The trap was set through a series of investment opportunities. I convinced Julian to put the entirety of his remaining assets and the deed to the manor into a shell company I controlled, promising a return that would fund his presidential run. He didn't even blink. He signed the papers in a candlelit study, laughing as he toasted to our mutual prosperity. He didn't realize he was signing his own eviction notice. By the 3rd week, the psychological toll began. I started leaving relics in the house. A single dried rose on Clara's pillow, a scent of my old perfume, sandalwood and bergamot, wafting through the vents. One night, I left the piano in the grand hall open to a specific sheet of music, Nocturne in E-flat major. It was the piece I had been playing the night of the fire. I heard Clara scream from across the house when she found it. "It's just a coincidence, Clara," Julian's voice echoed through the floorboards, tight with suppressed panic. "The staff, someone must have found it in the attic." "There was no attic left after the fire, Julian," she shrieked. Someone is here. Someone knows. I sat in the dark of my room, fingering the melted gold locket beneath my veil, and smiled. The gala was only 2 nights away. The night Julian would announce his candidacy. The night I would collect my debt. The night of the grand reopening gala was a masterclass in vanity. 500 of the most powerful people in the country filled the ballroom. Diamonds caught the light of 1,000 crystal facets, and the champagne flowed like a golden river. Julian stood on the dais, beaming. "Tonight," he announced into the microphone, "we celebrate not just the future of this campaign, but the restoration of Blackwood. And we owe a debt of gratitude to our benefactor, Madame Dumont." The crowd turned toward the top of the grand staircase. I stood there, a pillar of black lace against the white marble. "I believe it is time for the debt to be settled," I said. My voice was amplified by the hidden lapel mic I wore, cutting through the music like a blade. The room went silent. I began to descend the stairs, each tap of my cane echoing. "Julian," I said, my voice dropping the rasp and returning to the clear, melodic tone of the girl they thought they'd killed. "You've spent my money well. The marble is exquisite. The security system is state-of-the-art. It's a shame you forgot to read the fine print of the mortgage transfer you signed last Tuesday." Julian's face went the color of curdled milk. "What are you talking about? Madame, you're making a scene." "I'm making a revelation," I said, reaching the bottom of the stairs. Clara pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of terror. "Who are you?" I reached up. Slowly, I unwound the lace. First the outer veil, then the inner shroud. When the silk fell away, the room gasped. My face was a map of history, one side as smooth as it had been at 20, the other a landscape of silvered, puckered scar tissue that ran from my temple to my jaw. "Vivienne?" Clara whispered, the word barely a breath. "The ghost has come to collect the keys, Clara," I said. I pulled a stack of documents from my clutch and tossed them onto the nearest table. "As of midnight, this house, the accounts, and every asset tied to the Blackwood name belong to the VR Foundation. You are trespassers in my home." The panic was delicious. Julian tried to lunge at me, but the security team, the men I had been paying for a month, stepped in his path. "You can't do this!" he roared. "I'll have you arrested! You're a fraud!" "No, Julian," I said, stepping closer until I could smell the stale gin on his breath. "I'm the owner, and I've already sent the original blueprints of the East Wing, the ones showing the tampered gas lines, to the district attorney, along with the recording of your conversation in the library 3 nights ago, where you wondered aloud if pushing her was enough, or if you should have waited to see her burn." The color drained from Clara's lips. She looked around the room, seeing the cameras of the press, the horrified faces of their friends, and the cold, hard eyes of the law waiting at the entrance. I turned to the caterer, who stood frozen with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. I took a single glass of champagne. "I didn't come for blood," I told the room, raising the glass to my sister. "Blood is messy. It washes away. I came for the one thing you both value more than life, your reputation. I want you to live a long, long time in a world that knows exactly what you are." I took a sip of the vintage bubbly. It was cold, crisp, and tasted like victory. "Now," I said, pointing toward the door, "get out of my house." As they were led away in handcuffs, the silence of the ballroom was broken only by the sound of my cane tapping against the floor as I walked toward the balcony. I looked out over the salt marsh, the same one I had crawled through a decade ago. The wind was cold, but for the first time in 10 years, the fire inside me had finally gone out. I was no longer a ghost. I was home. The scandal didn't just break. It shattered the very foundation of the city's elite. For weeks, the front pages were plastered with the Gilded Resurrection, the footage of a scarred, veiled woman reclaiming a dynasty became the stuff of modern folklore. Julian's political career didn't just end. It became a cautionary tale taught in ethics classes. Without my money to buy silence or top-tier legal defense, the tampered gas line evidence was an anchor that dragged him straight to a state cell. Clara, ever the survivor, tried to sell her story to a tabloid, but I had already bought the publishing house. I didn't silence her. I just made sure her exclusive was filed under fiction. She lives in a small, cramped apartment in the city now. Sometimes I send her a single sandalwood candle on the anniversary of the fire, just so she knows I'm still watching the shadows. As for me, Vivienne is dead. She died in the rose bushes 10 years ago. The woman who sits in the library of Blackwood Manor today is someone else entirely. I stood on the balcony tonight, the same one Julian watched me fall from. The salt air was cold, but it didn't make me shiver. I looked down at the new rose bushes. They are white now, not red. I took the melted gold locket from my pocket. It was the last thing that tied me to the girl who loved a monster and trusted a snake. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed it into the dark surf of the marsh. I didn't hear it hit the water. I didn't need to. I turned back toward the warm, bright lights of my home and closed the glass doors. The debt is paid. The ledger is closed.